What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Daily Dime here on Thursday, one of our favorite types of days. We have both NFL and NBA to jump into, so I'll bring a couple NFL picks to this stream. Zach's going to handle a lot of the NBA stuff, and then if we get some stocks props here while we are live, we will talk about those too. And then, of course, we'll talk a little bit about the NBA DFS slate. And Zach, I know you've got someone you want to shout out for their NBA DFS win last night.
Yeah, I know, we've been coming in here. It feels like almost every other day from the NBA DFS side of things and celebrating somebody's win. Last night, it was our buddy Josh, so JJ Frick, who you saw in the chat yesterday during the stream, participating in here, takes down the $40 GPP there on DraftKings. So I think $40 into like 1,100. Looks like he may have split it up top with one or two other users, but we'll still take that. A takedown nonetheless. So great night. Congrats to Josh there. And just 4 games here tonight. But like you said, from a prop standpoint, we've also got Steelers-Browns. So from my fandom standpoint, I'm dual screening tonight. We've got Steelers-Browns on one screen. We've got Jazz-Spurs with no Wimby, no Vassell, no Sohan. So maybe 2 bad games that I'm going to be watching here tonight.
Yeah, 40 into 1,100 is awfully close to that multiplier on a 6-pick play, by the way. Yeah. So we can do the same thing potentially tonight here. So why don't we start it off with your favorite NBA play?
Yeah, so I'm going to start in that Spurs-Jazz game, but I'm going to start on the Utah side of things. And this is also something that the model has been attacking since Walker Kessler went out and continues to love this John Collins points prop, which doesn't seem to want to budge from that 16 and a half. So we're going to take the higher than selection here. Model on the rerun. He was a hair over 20 points this morning in the projections here at FTN Fantasy. Now just a hair below, but 19.7 points as a projection. Again, mentioning the Spurs front court on the other side when Victor Wembanyama is not on the court and he is ruled out already here today. That defense is not as abysmally awful as it was last year with no Vic on the court, but it's still below average, bottom half in the league. And John Collins, high usage guy, able to score the ball. And it's not just Wembanyama. Zac Collins, who I think probably gets a little bit more hate, maybe just from me, but just in general, more hate than he should be. He's been playing pretty okay this year, at least above the general consensus.
Right.
But he's questionable. And if he's out, look, I know both of us have an affinity for Charles Bassey, and we'll talk plenty about Bassey from a DFS perspective, but when you take this front court down, again, no Sohan either. So John Collins may be getting to see a trio of like Bassey, Harrison Barnes, Sandro Mamu, Kalashvili, Keldon Johnson. Like those are all great matchups individually. And again, as a team, the Spurs defense suffers here with these absences. So I'm right in lockstep with the model on Collins here again. And I see you pull up the little ladder there to 19 and a half. I don't hate that either.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, you can see the 4 of them here. You got 16.5 at 1x, 19.5 1.5, 24.5 at 4, and then 29.5 at 15.73x. So I think certainly this is worth a ladder. Just going throughout the whole thing, do different plays so you're not focused on just one of these. But do you have a favorite of these 4 numbers where you think the most value is?
I think probably that if we're going above the 16 and a half, right? I think the 4.04x on 24 and a half would make some sense to me because we've seen John Collins in this recent stretch go over that number twice. He was also at 28 points against Chicago back in the first week of November. So 3 times he has gone over that number this year. And of course, the minutes of late with Kessler out and Collins in the starting lineup, 34, 35, 32, 31, 29. Again, early in the season, he was playing 18, 23, 19, 23, 21, right? It's just a different role right now for John Collins. I think the 29 and a half is still, given the good matchup, it's still a little bit lofty. You're certainly being rewarded handsomely if you take that chance, but I think 24 and a half is where I would land if I had to pick one of those alternate numbers.
Yeah, for some context, that 15.7x multiplier turns a standard 3-pick play into 94x. So
that's maybe worth a little
pretty
sprinkle.
Big multiplier there. But yeah, for now, let's just leave the 16 and a half right where it is, and just remind everybody ladder the hell out of this thing. It's a great start. I will take us to the NFL streets next, going to a very familiar pick. We have used this a lot since Russell Wilson has taken over for Pittsburgh. We're going over 25.5 yards for George Pickens' longest reception. We hit the MVS longest reception on his 71-yard touchdown last week against Cleveland. It's the same matchup. They play the most single high in the league. Looking at the weather for tonight's game, it looks like we're getting a mix of rain and snow. And so the consensus might be, all right, well, they're not going to throw as much. And I think that's probably true. And they're not going to be able to throw the ball downfield as well. Well, that I kind of disagree with, because for one thing, it's going to affect the way Cleveland defends. If this was perfect weather game, you'd see more safety over the top of Pickens. Even if it's just one safety, they're going to shade him over Pickens. Now with this weather, they're going to sell out to stop the run. And I think Pickens is going to get those one-on-one opportunities on the outside. So I much, much, much prefer the 25.5 longest reception to his 60.5 receiving yards, because this could be a game where it's like 4 receptions, 50 yards, but one of them was for 30 and the others are, 4 yards downfield and it's not doing anything. So absolutely love this over 25.5 longest reception for Pickens. We've been on it like crazy, and now the matchup's perfect.
Yeah, I really have nothing negative to say about this. Again, even trying to set aside my Pickens fandom, right? It's something that we've been having success with ever since Russ got the starting gig under center about 4 or 5 weeks back now. Mm-hmm. Like, this team, relative to what we've seen, not just over the first 4 or 5 games of this year, but dating back the last couple seasons, like, this team is now moving the ball at a much more acceptable pace. And like you said, those explosive plays to Pickens have been a big factor. Not just that they're running the ball more effectively, that Najee Harris has been better this year, that Jaylen Warren is getting back into form. It's been George Pickens, Russell Wilson. A lot of talk has been made about those moon balls, and it's not just a gimmick. Like, that is a big factor in this Pittsburgh offense right now. And like you said, it only takes that one explosive play. And we know the opportunities are going to be there. We hope that the forecast ends up in our favor as we approach kickoff.
Yeah, I think one final thing I'll say here is this is also, he has multiple paths to getting there. Like, this could also be he takes a slant, the defender slips because of how wet and soaking the field is, and he runs for 30 yards. So lots of ways for Pickens to get there. I think, again, the longest reception is a fantastic bet, even if the over 60.5 is a little bit questionable now with this weather.
So I know we had a question here from our buddy Cards, and MR Don's in here saying, on DraftKings, would you play Charles Bassey today for the Spurs? Short answer, yes, but we'll also discuss those slates here when we get done with our prop picks. MR, so appreciate you stopping by. But Cards is asking to jump back to the Collins talking about laddering his points. Do you have a quick explanation for HB Cards on what we're talking about there?
Yeah, let's do this. Why don't you give your third pick, and then we can show exactly how the ladder works with a 3-pick play.
So I am going right back to the Jazz and Spurs game there, but I want to go to the San Antonio side. And, I mentioned no Wembanyama, no Vassell, no Sohan tonight. Questionable tag on Zach Collins. Probable tag on Chris Paul, who looked like he may have dislocated that thumb. They're calling it a sprain, so expecting him to play. But I'm looking at the rookie, Stephon Castle, and his assist prop, which is set at 4.5 here on Underdog. And I'm hoping that it's still at that 1.05x multiplier, because I think that's a nice little cookie. Stephon Castle averaging exactly 4.5 assists per game in his 8 games as a starter, right? Another guy similar to Collins, who is just in a different role over the last couple of weeks compared to what we saw to begin the season. In those 8 games as a starter, he's over this number in 5 of those 8. And one of the games, I think it was his first as a starter, he had 0 assists, right? So, it's been a little bit inconsistent, but leaning towards the over. Again, 5 of those 8 games. But when you take a look at his assist rate and some of the situations that I think we're going to find Steph Castle in tonight that differ from the rest of the year. Assist rate on the year is right around 20%, Alex. But with no Wemby since becoming a starter, that takes his assist rate up to 24.5. But then if you take Wemby off during his 8-game stretch as a starter, again, it's a relatively small sample size, but this is the role that Castle has now with this short-handed Spurs team. You take Wemby off during this 8-game stretch. You take Chris Paul off as well. 32.8% assist rate. And if you look back just to last game, right, which was I think the second game in a row that we've had those three bigger names for San Antonio out, he spent 14 minutes and 15 seconds, give or take a couple seconds there, without Chris Paul on the court against OKC the other night. This game, very close spread. I think it was 2.5 last time I looked. Yeah, Spurs by 2.5 here. Healthy 224.5 implied total. So this one isn't projected to be super ugly in terms of an implied total standpoint. So if we're getting nearly half of Stephon Castle's run with no Chris Paul and that 30+% assist rate, I really like the over here. And again, we're getting that small multiplier boost unless they took it away from us here in the last 15 minutes.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't see it, but it's usually the kind of thing that will be back very shortly. They sometimes take things down just to reevaluate, or maybe they're waiting on a small piece of news and it'll be back. I'll also point out, last two games, so without Wembanyama, Castle's up to 12 potential assists per game to 12.5 from Chris Paul. So you nailed it here. His role is really growing, and the assist potential is huge. So for the time being, let's just pretend that we were going to go 19.5 points in assists, just so we can really show.
I just refreshed, and it is there for me now. So maybe a refresh does it, but we'll see.
I did it 60 seconds ago, but apparently that wasn't quick enough. All right, let's
maybe
see.
they're just locking you out of it. Who knows? Yeah, what is going on? I'm sitting here staring at the full menu of Steph Castle.
That's possible. It's definitely possible. You know what? It also can sometimes be the search function. So let's do this. Let's just go to NBA and let's search the Spurs instead. And let's see what we got for Castle. No.
Yeah, what in the world?
Are they locking me out of something? I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm in Pennsylvania right now. Regardless, pretend this is Castle over 5.5. So you see the standard 3x payout is 6x. So a ladder is, instead of saying, all right, let's say I want to spend $100 on this 3-pick play. Instead of putting $100 on this 3-pick play for 6x, I'm going to say I'm going to put 50 on this 3x and then, or this 3-pick play. And then I'm going to go to Collins and I'm going to go to the higher than 19.5. Now I'm getting, instead of the 6x, I'm getting 9x. I'll put $25 on this one. Now I'm going to go to the Collins 24.5 for 4x. Suddenly this becomes 24x. Now I'll put, let's say, $15 on this one. And now I have $10 remaining that I can then spend on the same 3-pick play, but now with 29.5 points all the way up at 94.4x. So that's how a ladder works. You're essentially saying, I don't want to go all in on the really high, the super high multiplier, because I could be right about John Collins, have him score 27 points and lose this play. So instead, I want the high probability aspect of it, but I also want the upside that comes with not just being right about him hitting over 16.5, but being right about him hitting over 19.5 and over 24.5 and potentially even over 29.5 too. So that's how a ladder works here on Underdog. And honestly, maybe you don't love the upside for John Collins. So you say, all right, I just want the 1x on him, but I really like the upside for Pickens. So I'll go ladder Pickens up to 5.4x over 49.5 for his longest reception. Lots of different ways you can do it. The way that we tend to pick which one to ladder is not just who is the most inefficiently priced, but also who has that, that crazy upside where if we're right about this situation, if we're right that John Collins is just going to continue to have this great usage and the minutes, then he has a much better chance than Underdog is assuming to get to those upper numbers as well. Whereas Pickens, I love the 25.5. I don't love the 49.5 because we've seen him consistently hitting on these, as you put it, the moon balls that are like 30 yards downfield, but he's not breaking those for touchdowns, right? It's been pretty consistently 30 yards, 33 yards, 41 yards, something in that range. So we don't have a whole lot of room there to ladder it. So I would prefer the John Collins ladder here.
Yeah, and those have been kind of, again, from the guy that's watching every play of those games, those are mostly jump balls, or he's leading him down the sideline and out of bounds. So there hasn't been a ton. I want to say he has really one long touchdown on the year. We saw a couple last season, that's kind of the style. And I see cards saying that's helping out. Nico Collins was a great example from Monday night, called back by the flag, but the process was
Yeah.
there, right? All the way up to, what was it, 75.5, I think was the number.
Yeah, I think we went to 59 and a half, needing
Okay,
the
yeah.
50 yarder.
Might have been a
But
75-yard touchdown that was called back.
yeah, Nico also then hit on like a deep slant type thing where he just had some run after the catch, just like Pickens did 2 weeks ago when he hit that longest reception. So again, like we're seeing him consistently get to this number, this 25 and a half. But let me actually bring up his game log so we can see the exact longest receptions the last few games: 37, 34, 43, 44, and 31 in those last 5 games. So again, I like laddering it because he can take something else. We saw in his first start, or in Mason Rudolph's first start last season, like one of the very first plays of the game, slant to Pickens. There's no safety behind him. He just takes off and goes the distance. So certainly he has that in him, but it's the laddered picks for him are not underestimating his chance of getting a 50-plus yarder the way that they're underestimating his chance of getting 25 and a half. Because again, he's done that in 5 straight games. And in some of those games, he's done it multiple times. I think in one of them, he even did it 3 times going over 25 and a half against the Jets. So yeah, this is I think a great question card. So appreciate you asking it. And anytime you want to ask questions like this, not just you, but anyone else watching, you can always do that as well. And we're here to teach what we're trying to do, teach our process, and not just give picks.
Yeah, absolutely. And just as an aside, just to illustrate the type of sports PTSD I have, you just mentioned short slant with no safety help over the top, and I have flashbacks of Ike Taylor getting burned by Tim Tebow and Demaryius Thomas in the 2014-13 playoffs or whatever it is. I'm a lunatic, man. Let's keep moving on with the picks. I see our guy Derek in here said any interest in Keldon tonight. He was plus 175 at 15 plus points when Vassell was ruled out on Tuesday. I'm a little hesitant there, Derek, because Keldon went off the other night. Like, I think he started 6 of 6 from 3, ended up with 20 plus points. And that was a standout game from him, even in a shorthanded scenario. So, like, I'm a little hesitant to go back there. He was 7 of 15, 6 of 12 from 3. He cooled off as that game progressed into the fourth quarter. The projections here have him under 15. I want to say it's a hair under 14 last time I looked. Yeah, so 13.9 is his projection here at FTN Fantasy. But if you're getting if he's plus 175 to score 15 or more points here tonight, I would absolutely take that. I just don't know, are you still getting that number, right? Like, that feels like it's probably a little lofty this morning. But again, I'm in Texas, so I'm not allowed to bet things like that, at least legally. You have any thoughts there? Again, if it's just like we're taking over 14 and a half, it's not something that jumps out to me, but if you're getting the extra juice, I like it.
Yeah, I was busy also checking on this Castle stuff. I have him available at this assist number on my phone. So reminder, people, sometimes the desktop does some weird things for you. So always make sure you're checking your phone for promos. And if you can't find a pick that you know exists on desktop, check the phone. Sometimes apparently it's there too.
And shout out to Derek, though, because he was in the chat yesterday asking about Levine threes, and I kind of shied away from it. He grabbed it, and again, 4 plus threes, that hit. So that was a great call by you, Derek. And again, like, don't let me being a little hesitant on Keldon. Like, again, just like with Levine last night, if you think you see something in the matchup and you feel strongly about it, like, don't let me hold you up. I'll give my input, but sometimes you're gonna get something right that I don't necessarily see.
I would also say check to make sure that underdog isn't penalizing correlation in that way. But like, if you have Castle over assists, Keldon points makes a whole lot of sense. So as long as they're not penalizing that, that's that just makes the Keldon play that much more interesting. So double check again that they're not penalizing correlation, because they do that often in other sports, but I haven't seen it yet in NBA. So you might be good to go there. All right, what is your next NBA pick?
Yes, I've got one other that I really like here this morning. So as of now, I'm feeling like this is a night where I'm going to take our picks and just rotate through with 3 pick entries here on Underdog. But I'm looking at RJ Barrett. And for the first time in a long time here, Alex, we're looking at the lower than his 34.5 PRA. And this is kind of the thinking here for me, Alex, is twofold. First, Scotty Barnes upgraded to questionable. He was cleared for contact this week, fully practiced yesterday, and again listed questionable coming into the day. There's no guarantee that he's going to suit up and play here tonight. And even if he does, it's going to be in a limited fashion, right? It was an orbital fracture. So like he's probably not in the worst shape, but definitely not in 34, 35 minute per game shape. But if you look at RJ Wright, traded to Toronto last year at the deadline from New York, he's played with Scotty Barnes 24 games since then, and he averages 30.7 PRA. So again, the matchup is the second part because they're taking on the Wolves who just recently lost twice in a row to the Blazers. I think they're a little bit motivated here tonight on the road. You can see Wolves 8-point road favorites here in Toronto. So even if Scotty Barnes doesn't go and RJ Barrett is back in this significant, very much an alpha type of role, it's not like it's going to be an easy time for him dealing with Jaden McDaniels defense, Nikhil Alexander Walker defense, Anthony Edwards defense, right? You can get an entire trio in terms of your individual matchups here tonight. And then, RJ Barrett has been really good with Pirtle in the pick and roll this year. But you're also going up against Rudy Gobert. And as much shit as I like to talk about Rudy and what he does to what I perceive as the lack of chance to win a title with him as your starting center, he is still very much one of the best. And some people may even argue the best rim defender in the league still. And it's not going to be an easy time, even if Scotty Barnes is out. So I like attacking the under here today. And if Scotty Barnes was ruled in, I think this number again becomes a smash under. So I'm going ahead and taking a chance, leaning into what my instinct is that Scotty Barnes is probably going to play in a limited fashion here tonight. But again, this is why I listed this third of my 3 NBA picks here this morning, because this I think is the one that comes with the most risk. Similar to like Donovan Clingan last night, which ended up working out in our favor because Isaiah Hartenstein surprisingly played last night, but then he came off the bench. So he affected the Time Lord Robert Williams in that second unit run a lot more negatively than Clingan, and Clingan soared past the 7.5. I think coming into the fourth quarter already had 9 rebounds. So again, this is one of those that we're trying to play into the news. The sites have posted these lines, even with the pending questionable tag. And I'm trying to take advantage, especially because I feel like it's still a decent lower than play, even if Barnes misses.
Yeah, I just real quick wanted to show that we can't ladder unders the same way we ladder overs. They just don't give us as many options. But one thing I do encourage people to do is when you feel like an under is risky, you can go to a more extreme under. And part of that is like, remember what we just talked about with Barrett. It's so much the matchup. It's the fact that we don't necessarily know what Barnes' role is going to be. Well, if all those things align and Minnesota blows them out, there's a chance that Barrett doesn't come anywhere close to this 34.5 number. So if you feel like it's a little bit too risky to love at 34.5, get that extra payout. And if everything that is making you excited to, or if everything that's making you lean to the under does come to fruition, there's a chance he also goes under 29.5 instead of just 34.5. So something for people to keep in mind as well. And from there, I will take us back to the NFL. And I want to actually give a shout out to our guy Steelers fan in the NFL Discord. Might have been the Pick'em Discord, actually. I don't know, a Steelers fan, if you are watching this live, but he actually shouted out Russell Wilson rushing yards. And he said Jameis Winston rushing yards. He said an over. It made me look into it. And I noticed a few things. Number one, going way back to 2021, Jameis Winston scrambled a lot. He had consecutive games of 40 rushing yards, but then he has played sparingly, obviously, in the last 3 years, but we haven't really seen him scramble at all. He had 5 for 32 against the Chargers a couple games ago, and that was a total aberration. And so the 7.5 number is pretty interesting as just like in any matchup to go under, because most of the time he's not scrambling at all. And so, the majority of his carries are he kneeled down for -1 yards at the end of the first half or something like that, right? But then using Stats Hub, we can look at scramble yards allowed. Pittsburgh has allowed the fewest scramble yards in the league despite just facing Lamar Jackson. Can you guess their total scramble yards allowed for the entire season, Zach?
Ooh, probably coming in around a nice, I don't know, 69?
15.
Well, I mean, look, I think Tomlin has Lamar Jackson's number, but that is eye-popping.
Lamar had 4 carries for 60 yards this past week. Not a single one was a scramble. And when I saw that, I was like, is that definitely true? Did we mess up with the charting? So I went back, I looked at all those runs.
Yeah.
Not only were they all designed, but he had a number of times where he looked to escape the pocket, and there's like a defensive end just wheeling around, shutting off the lane. There was one time where it looked like he escaped to the outside. A safety comes flying down and stops him for a 3-yard loss. He kept looking for it, and he had nothing. This Pittsburgh defensive line is just so damn disciplined that this is obviously something that, I'm sure they were paying more attention to Lamar Jackson than they'll pay to Jameis Winston as a scrambler. But this is just who they are. It's part of how they defend and how they rush the passer. They're all disciplined, and it's why this defense has been so consistently good for so long. So under 7.5 rushing yards for Jameis Winston, I think, is a fantastic value. Kind of assuming he's going to get 50% of the scramble yards that Pittsburgh has allowed all season. Like it's hard to see. It's certainly possible. It's only 7.5. That can be just one play, but I think odds are very, very much in our favor.
Well, I think to your point about the edge rushers, right? You're probably not going to see a ton of spies sitting there in the middle of the field on Jameis like you did against Lamar last week, but a lot was made, I thought, in the lead up to last week's game about the absence of Alex Highsmith, but they got Nick Herbig back, and when he's been in relief, whether it's Highsmith healthy and it's just getting, a couple reps for Herbig, I think second-year player, maybe third, but he's been pretty productive, and like we've seen over the years, right? As long as number 90 is on that left side, whoever's there, whether it's Bud Dupree, Alex Highsmith, Nick Herbig, like those guys succeed as well. So I'm with you on this one.
I'm glad you mentioned Watt, because I think that's a big part of this. It's not just that everyone's disciplined and that it's hard to find scrambling lanes. It's that quarterbacks don't feel comfortable. They don't feel comfortable in the pocket. They don't feel like, I can try to find an escape path, because it's not just that Watt's going to get to them. It's that when he gets to them, he's going to cause a fumble so often. So quarterbacks are feeling like, all right, once I'm back here, I've got to either just escape and throw it away, or I need to throw the ball sooner. So like I said, it's not just that they are doing well against scrambles. It's that they're not allowing scrambles, period. Lamar Jackson had 0 scrambles against them. So under 7.5 just seems like a really big opportunity here with Jameis. Something I will shout out later on our 5:30 show as well. All right, let's jump over to DFS and take a look at the first look of GPP scores tonight. And let me know if anything on this page really stands out to you. Where do you want to start your night tonight?
Well, I think number one, and it's what MR Don mentioned earlier, talking about can we play Bassie on DK tonight? And yes, absolutely. Everybody else is going to as well. You can see both Steph Castle and Charles Bassie are the 2 highest owned plays in the morning run here this morning. And I think we will see Charles Bassie, if Zach Collins is ruled out, come up above 4-game slate, man, maybe 70%. And I think that is still going to be chalk you need to eat. It's a little unfortunate that it's not a larger slate and that we have the Q tag on Collins, because we ate with Charles Bassie the other night at 5%, at 3,400. And now, the secret's kind of out. But that's why you want to be early on some of these guys rather than waiting to see it. I noticed when you had it sorted by GPP score, the Dalton Connect is up top. And I do think Rui Hachimura gets back in there today for the Lakers. I also think Dalton Connect's going to continue to start for D'Angelo Russell here. Like, it's not Max Christie time. It's not D'Lo's not getting back in there. So I think while the minutes projection could come down, which of course will lower his fantasy point projection, and the GPP score is going to come down a little bit, I look over there at that 4% number, 5,100 guard forward eligible. Again, tough matchup against the Magic. But I think to me, that kind of put me back on Dalton Connect here this morning, seeing that the model, even if I don't agree necessarily with how many minutes we've assigned so far, the minutes builder assigned this morning, I still think that is one that is clearly being overlooked by the field because the price just doesn't budge right now on Dalton Connect. It's been mid to high fours, now 37 real points the other night, 18 straight, and he only goes up to 5,100. So multi-position eligible, low ownership. I do have my eye on that now that the GPP score in the model is pointing it out. And from that game, the one injury report we are waiting on is the Orlando Magic. They took an L last night. They're doing the LA back-to-back here. There's a chance. I don't think I would say it's likely, but there's a chance we see this injury report come out probably on the 1:30 or 2:30 injury report here Eastern time. And there's a Suggs on there, or there is maybe a Franz Wagner, right? It could be somebody that takes a seat here tonight, given how much of a load some of these main pieces have had with Paolo out, with Wendell Carter Jr. out. So again, we don't know until that happens, but I would not be shocked to see something open up there with Orlando. Like outside of that, though, we mentioned Bassey. We've talked about Zach Collins being questionable multiple times. I think Spurs Jazz looks like a pretty great matchup. On the other side, you've got a Q tag on Jordan Clarkson. So if he sits, Keontae George, who I think is probably a little underrepresented in the ownership at this point. I didn't see the specific number, but I see 21% on Colin Sexton there. Like Sexton, George, Isaiah Collier would come into play then as a very usable piece of value if Clarkson takes a seat here tonight. I think Mike Conley's recent minutes, talking about Minnesota and Toronto, you look at his recent minutes, those are a little bit surprising considering what we know about how they're treating Mike Conley this year in the advanced stages of his career, 37 and then 30 minutes over the last two. He's questionable with a toe sprain here tonight. Dante DiVincenzo is also questionable here tonight, so we could get some additional value from the Minnesota side of things in the form of, more minutes for Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Maybe you're bringing, one of those kind of ancillary wings into the fold. I don't think they're looking to run big minutes for a guy like Rob Dillingham or even Terrence Shannon, but maybe Josh Minot in an MME scenario. Maybe if both of those Wolves are out, you're considering him. And then, of course, not overlooking the remaining main pieces of that rotation that would benefit some from those potential absences. And then Detroit at Charlotte just looks like, from a fantasy environment, like a gold mine. While we've been live here, Miles Bridges downgraded to questionable, so you may have some additional values there. LaMelo, Brandon Miller in that instance, of course, stand out. Grant Williams is going to be a mid-range option. On the other side, right, I think Cade, specifically on FanDuel, I was looking at that ownership this morning. Cade and LaMelo look like they're very popular at the top of point guard, which makes sense, and I'm not ignoring those guys at all, but I think probably opens up some pivot opportunities to a Jaden Ivey, a Tobias Harris, a Brandon Miller. Miles Bridges would have been on that list, but now he's questionable. And then, I will say, I took a peek at the Prize Picks fantasy score, perhaps the one that stood out to me just from this was the only game that was posted before we went live. Jalen Duren, more than 30.5 fantasy score. Pretty good matchup there against Charlotte. Doesn't need to go 30-plus minutes to get over that number. So if you're looking at Prize Picks, that's one that caught my eye here this morning. So very long-winded kind of sprint through the 4 games here tonight, but it is shaping up to me right now to be not as much of a stars and scrubs slate as there's no Antonio Reeves on this slate. I don't think there's going to be any Jalen Tyson, near 3K, but a lot of 4K range value that already looks appetizing, even more that could open up throughout. And not a ton of spend up options because, again, it's just a 4-game slate and you're missing Wembanyama and, you're missing guys like Paolo, guys like Emmanuel Quickly, Q tag on Scotty Barnes. But I think it's shaping up to be a pretty fun slate for a 4-gamer. And the prize pool is not terrible on either site for a Thursday night football type of night here.
Some notes here. Jameis bumped to 8.5. That's great news.
Even better.
UD apparently pulled John Collins because Clarkson doubtful news. My guess is he'll come back and he'll probably be 16.5, 17.5, something like that. So I don't think it'll be too bad when he does come back. Just keep an eye out for it. And Mr. Don asking any DK value today and wants a spend up. So plenty of value, as you can see here on the ownership page. You can always sort by value. So Steph Castle, don't connect up here. I also wanted to say, as far as connect goes, like I think there's a definite chance that his ownership will come up if other sites agree with us that he's still going to have his role, and Hachimura potentially coming back isn't the gigantic negative that like we would automatically assume it to be based on the rotations earlier this season. Then I think his ownership could crawl up. So keep an eye on that as well. And then as far as spend ups go, do you have a favorite for tonight, Zach?
Yeah, Anthony Davis. Not any sort of special sauce here. 14% on a 4-gamer, a guy who I think should be garnering some MVP interest, right?
Yeah.
It may be tough to give it to anybody but Jokic at this point, but Anthony Davis is having one of the best seasons of his career. I think it's a little bit surprising. I would not have said coming into the year that Anthony Davis's best seasons are ahead of him, and he's kind of proving that to be the case here. Like, he has been awesome with what JJ Redick is doing, making him finally the centerpiece of everything that they do offensively, and he's keeping up the level on the defensive end. So 11-1 on this slate. In my placeholder last night, even before we got some of the news that we have here this morning, I was able to fit him in pretty seamlessly. So Anthony Davis would be my shout. You can see he's 4.5 points clear of the field there in our projections. And, he's averaging 2.5 more DK points than what our projection is there in the model. So there's clearly a ceiling to just really break away from the rest of the field on this 4-gamer.
Yeah, I think Franz is interesting too. You can see he's pretty clearly behind LeBron and LaMelo in projection, but then ceiling projection is only half a point behind each. So no surprise to see he has a nice GPP score too. One final thing I wanted to point out on this slate is if we sort by projected ownership, one thing I always like to look at, particularly with some of these negative GPP scores, is what is the fail percentage? The main argument for fading a bad GPP score is often if he fails, then I get a lot of leverage over all of the lineups that used him. Well, someone like Charles Bassey, we have a 2.8% fail percentage on. You're not getting that advantage, right? You're not hoping for that 3% of the time. There are better ways to try and win a slate with some low-owned guys with great GPP scores, things like that. For comparison's sake, like a negative 3.2 GPP score from Rudy Gobert comes with a 23% fail percentage. So that's the kind of thing that I always like to look at as well with all of this data that we have on the ownership page. And as we all continue to kind of learn together on how to best use this for NBA, I think that's worth shouting out and certainly something that has helped us quite a bit along the way.
I did just see Shams tweet out that we have confirmation of how the 4-team All-Star game will work, kind of tournament style here this year. So 2 semifinal games, first to 40, winners advance. The finals game is first to 25. So as he notes here, quick burst competition, pickup ball-esque. And look, the league had to do something. I've always been a fan of the All-Star game, but even I cannot sugarcoat how it's looked over the last 2 seasons. So I appreciate the league trying to make it a little more gimmicky here at the All-Star game, get the players, more involved. We do not have to be diving on the floor for loose balls and flagrant fouls, but we can go out there and play ball, right? Like the players have done this for decades in the NBA. And so not to be that guy who's like back in my day, but we can do better than what we've done over the last couple.
Yeah, I think part of this whole conversation is like back in the day, it was a lot harder for the average fan to see the best players go up against all the best players. And so All-Star break, the All-Star game actually created like a unique opportunity. And now we get how many national TV games a week? So like we all see it. So there's less of like not necessarily egos of the players, but there's less trying to prove who's the best because it happens all the time throughout the NBA season. So definitely a change was needed. Any closing thoughts here on today's NBA slate?
Yeah, just got the update. Chris Paul in, Zach Collins in. So I actually like that because it's going to keep that Charles Bassey number more muted. And 4K on DraftKings, I'm still going after it.
Absolutely. All right, guys, we will be back at 5:30 for the Millie Show, talking through the NFL slate. Catch you guys next time.